Before we get into the class, B'ezrat Hashem, I'm going to explain what we're going to do. So first of all, we started already, Baruch Hashem, the reading of the Zohar. Now what is the concept of the reading of the Zohar? Because as we see, that the reading of the Zohar is in Aramaic. There is no pirush, there is no explanation. What we are reading, we have no understanding on what it says. We read from the middle of the page, from the beginning. Is it important? What does it do to someone? So B'ezrat Hashem Abotai, we started something that does more than what a person can think. We're going to B'ezrat Hashem planning, and with the help of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we're going to succeed, that once a month, we're going to finish the Zohar Kadosh. And once a month, on Rosh Chodesh, on the day of when we start a new month, we're going to do a Siyum Masechet. And it's like what the Gemara says in Pesachim, that when a person brings Kedusha to the beginning of his month, it is as if that he's receiving upon himself the Shekhinah itself. So B'ezrat Hashem, we're going to do our best, B'ezrat Hashem, with the help of Hashem, to finish the entire Zohar every single month. Now what is the concept of reading the Zohar without understanding, reading the Zohar without Pirush? And there's a reason that we have the printed version without any explanation. And even if you read Hebrew, or even if you understand Aramaic, even those who understand Aramaic, it's very complicated to understand the Zohar. The Zohar has its own language, it's its own Aramaic. It's not like any other Aramaic. There's a concept of Botai, that the Zohar Kadosh, essentially, and we're going to get into it more in the class, because this is not going to be the regular class that we're going to do. We're going to explain what the class of Zohar will be. When a person reads the Zohar Kadosh, what he does essentially is he brings down a Kedusha and like a Bisadat Ishmaya upon himself. A person that reads Zohar takes his own neshama and lifts it. By reading the Zohar, a person takes his neshama and pushes it to a higher level in Shamayim. He brings his neshama to a holier level, which is something amazing. We all search where we can bring ourselves closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu to make our connection with Hashem more seamless, to make our connection with Hashem more easy. A lot of people, a lot of times we want to do teshuvah, we want to be able to wake up in the morning and to have that will to run and to learn Torah and to do a mitzvot, but that fire is being held back. Why? Because our neshama is in the world of Gashmiut. Our neshama, our body is surrounded or is around our neshama. Our neshama is full, piled on top of it, so much klipot, so much tum'ah, all the things, all the material that exists in the world. that is what holds us back, what clogs our heart, what seals our heart from getting up and from waking up in the morning and saying, I'm going to do only Torah and mitzvot. So what can a person do to bring himself closer? What can a person do to naturally make his own being to a person that has more kedusha? To naturally make himself to a person that has more of a heat in his heart to get up and to do a mitzvah. So Chacham Batzion Shaul would constantly tell all the young people, and he would always focus on the young people, because the young people, essentially what you are when you're young, the young is how you start your life. When you're young, you're still able to bend and to mold yourself. You don't have to be 6 years old. Even young people, they're 20, 30. The way you are at that age, that's how you will continue to grow. Chacham Batzion Shaul would always repeat to all those young people that they always, if a person wants to do teshuvah, or just a person wants to fill his life with more kedusha and with more shefa, he should read the Zohar without an explanation. Why? Because when you read the Zohar without an explanation, it is like you are putting a code. When you type, you put 1, 2, 3. So when you put that code, you're typing the Zohar into Shamayim, and what that does is it takes your neshama and it lifts it and lifts it and lifts it. But suddenly, coming closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, filling your life with Kedusha is not something that's not so hard anymore. Because you have no longer so many layers of sitracha, so many layers of klipa. Klipa, and we're going to don't worry, we're going to learn all these words and all the meaning of them. Klipa is like what we can call, you see how an onion, what is an onion? How is an onion built? Layers and layers and layers. So these layers are not necessarily good things. Whenever a person does something that is negative, he puts on himself another layer of negativity. If you do a lot, what are you going to end up? You're going to end up with a lot of layers. When you have a lot of layers, what happens to what's inside? It becomes choked, it becomes not powerful, it becomes diluted, because it's choked. So the Zohar Kadosh is what brings us closer, what lifts, what tears all those layers, and what frees our own neshama in order to really to fly freely and to go closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and for us to come close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in an easy way. So that is why it is so important that we're going to be reading the Zohar. It's going to bring us Kedusha. Any bad that's in our life is going to burn. The Zohar Kadosh is like fire. When we learn the Zohar, when we read the Zohar, we bring down fire to the world. We surround ourselves with the Shekhinah. When that Shekhinah that we taste from, that what like the Zohar says, that what is Zohar? It's like a person that tastes from Etz HaChaim. It's like a person that tastes from Gan Eden. So if you bring down the Kedusha and the Shekhinah that doesn't necessarily belong here, that it is at a high level, we can benefit that and see the results in our own lives. That is why, B'et Hashem, we're going to start and we're going to do the Limud HaZohar. After every shiur, after every tefillah that we do, we're going to read one page of Zohar, and B'ezrat Hashem, with that we merit a lot of bachot and a lot of b'tzadei d'shmaya B'et Hashem. Now, this shiur of Zohar is not going to be a shiur, we're not going to go page by page, and we're not either going to go from parasha to parasha. In the beginning we thought that we're going to just jump around and to find what's interesting that week, but that doesn't have a direction. So what we're going to do, B'ezrat Hashem, for this entire shiur of Zohar, is we're going to start from the morning. You understand what is the morning? From the morning, when a person wakes up, every small detail that happens throughout the day, what is really happening that we don't see. So we're going to start from the morning, that when a person wakes up, what happens when he does Netilat Yadayim? What happens when a person wakes up in the morning, the neshama comes down, everything that happens from the morning, and we're going to do piece by piece after we finish the entire seder of the day, the entire order of the day. We're going to do Shabbat. After we do Shabbat, we're going to do holidays. But like that, we're going to start, and when we finish, we're going to have really an understanding of our world around us. We're going to have an understanding and a deep meaning of whatever mitzvah that we do. When we hear mitzvah, Netilat Yadayim, okay, Netilat Yadayim, I'm washing my hands. I wash my hands with soap also when I touch dust. What is really happening when a person does Netilat Yadayim? What really happens when a person answers Amen? What really happens when a person does a certain mitzvah? What really happens when a person Chas v'Shalom? Something bad. So if we understand all the meaning behind it, I believe that it will be easier for us to also understand, because what is very hard for a lot of people is to look at a mitzvah that we don't understand the meaning, the meaning, what's happening, why are we doing this, why are we not doing specific things. It's harder to connect to it. But the moment that we know all the meaning, we know why we do specific things throughout the day, B'ezrat Hashem, not only that we will want to do it more, we'll have the will to get up and to do it, but we'll also have a better understanding about our Torah, and a better understanding on the way that we live. So that is going to be something very important. So this shiur, for the first shiur, is going to be just a shiur about what is the Zohar, and why should a person study Zohar today. That's going to be the first shiur. Next shiur, B'ezrat Hashem, we're going to study how to learn Zohar. Because even when you learn Zohar and Kabbalah, you have to know what you're doing. You have to know how you're learning, what questions to think of, what questions to ask, rules, basic laws, in order to enter it. Because if we're going to enter it and we have no basic understanding on what we're getting into, we can have a lot of questions. Now, yes, after shiur, we're going to have questions and answers, but still, why would we get to that point where someone's going to have questions? So next shiur, B'ezrat Hashem, we're going to be covering, we're going to see what we can finish, covering the laws of how to study Zohar. Not just studying Zohar, but how. At the moment we know how to study Zohar and all the basic rules, we'll be able to run B'ezrat Hashem for it. To go from one subject to another, and to have no problem to get through them. Now, Botay, what is the Zohar Kadosh? What is Kabbalah? So, Botay, this is something that we spoke about in the past, but I'm going to repeat it, and I'm going to try to make it a little bit short for everyone to hear. We know, Rabotai, that we have one Torah. We have one Torah. We have one Torah. We have one HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It is very clear. There's no need to lengthen on that. But we know that our Torah breaks to how many pieces? To 3 pieces. The Torah breaks to Torah shebichtav, Torah shebe'al peh, and Torah shebesod. The Torah that is written down, which was the Torah Nevi'im, Ktuvim, the Chamisha Torah, which is like the Sefer Torah, all the Nevi'im. There are all the books that were written down by Moshe, by Chachmei Israel at the time of Bet HaMikdash. That is the first Torah, the Torah that is written down. The second Torah is the Torah shebe'al peh. It's the Torah that is known that we learn it by heart. So, for example, halachot, rules, laws, mishnayot, gemarot, all those learnings fall under the studying of limud by heart, which was essentially a learning that was not allowed to be ever written on paper. That it was supposed to be a learning that would only get passed on from mouth to ear. And that was the only way for a person to learn. But Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi saw that by leaving the Torah Shabbat, by leaving the Torah that was only by heart like that, we can fall into a chance that if people go far from the derech, people can forget the Torah. The entire Torah Shabbat can be forgotten. And we see that because how many we have Shisha Sita Mishnah. We have only 6 pieces of Mishnah. Chazal say that at one time there were 600. So where did all those Mishnayot go? That was Torah shebe'al peh. The Torah shebe'al peh, it was big, but Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi saw that it had to be written down. So that is the second Torah. The third Torah is Torah shebisod, the Torah of the secret, Kabbalah, Zohar. What is the Torah shebisod? Torah shebisod, Kabbalah, is essentially the Torah that a person receives, not taught or learned. It's a Torah that a person receives from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, from Shamayim, when he reaches a certain level. And that is the name Kabbalah. What is the name, the word Kabbalah, if we translate it? Likabel, to receive. That limud Kabbalah was only given by receiving it. It was not a limud that was taught. Now, Rabotai, now that we understand all 3 of the different Torahs, we also see that each Torah represents another time. And we're going to understand exactly what it means throughout the shiur. We see that the Torah shebichtav, the written Torah, represents what? Represents the past. It was the rules that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave Moshe. It was the history of Bnei Israel. It was all the things that we do on a daily basis. We mentioned, I don't know how many times a day, Yitziat Mitzrayim, Bnei Israel leaving Egypt. The Torah shebichtav, the Chamisha Torah, and like we mentioned, that Torah, the written Torah, represents the past. Judaism of the past. Torah shebe'al peh, the Torah that is learned by heart, represents what? The present. Why? Because laws. Do this, don't do this. The Gemara, all the Gemara is building an halakha, building a law. Halachot, laws, are all now what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do. So the Torah shebe'al peh represents the present. So what is the Torah shebisod? It represents the future. How? We're going to explain how the Torah shebisod represents the future. We know, Rabotai, that the first one that brought down Torah shebisod, the Kabbalah, was who? Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was the first one that took this learning of Kabbalah, because essentially the learning of Kabbalah existed from 2,000 years before the world was created. Because the Kabbalah is the core of the Torah. It's the secret, it's the Torah that exists for the next world, the world upstairs. Upstairs, that's how we say it. So that the Torah, the Kabbalah always existed. Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, that was the Torah that they lived with. It just was not a Torah that was taught. So Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai brought down that Torah. How did he bring down the Torah? It's told in the Gemara in Masechet Shabbat that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, in the end of the second destruction of the temple, the second temple, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai decided that he's going to run away from the city and take with him his son Rabbi Elazar and leave and go to a forest, and in that forest he's going to bring down something big. So Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai escaped from the city. He ran away from the entire world. He cut himself off from the entire world, went into a cave, him and his son, and sat there for 12 years. Buried himself. Like what the Tzaddik says, what we know what the Gemara said, that they would completely bury themselves throughout the day to stay covered while limud Torah, because you're not allowed to be, you have to be dressed properly when you learn Torah. And like what Rabbi Ariel said, that there was a miracle because they were inside the me'ara, they were inside the cave. How can they survive? So HaKadosh Baruch Hu did a miracle. That what did he make to grow right outside the tree, right outside the
entrance?
The entrance, what? A tree of carob. That they lived those 12 years, the first 12 years, because then he did another year, but the first 12 years, they lived on that carob. And in those 12 years, where he was cut out the world, of those 12 years that he sat down in the cave and completely focused only on the Torah, he brought down the entire limud of Kabbalah, the entire limud of Zohar, and he wrote it down for generations to come. Now, Botai, the question could be asked, why? If we read Kabbalah, we learn Kabbalah, we see that the entire Kabbalah has nothing to do with us. Yes, it's what we do, what affects, what happens from our actions. But the entire limud of Kabbalah are things that have to do with what world? With the world to come, up steps. The world of the angels, the world of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So why did Rabbi Shimon from the first place have to bring down the Kabbalah? What's the need for the Kabbalah? If it's not a Torah that has to do with us, then why bring it down? That's the first question. The second question is that who gave Rabbi Shimon permission? From where did this mission of bringing down the Kabbalah, from bringing down the Zohar, start? From where did Rabbi Shimon start this mission of bringing down the Kabbalah? That, Rabotai, is something that is very interesting. Ari HaKadosh, I'm going to answer one question at a time. Ari HaKadosh explains about from where Rabbi Shimon started this mission of bringing down the Kabbalah. We know, Rabotai, that before Moshe Rabbeinu brought down the Torah, where did he go? He went up to the sky. When he was in the sky, he was there for how long? 40 days and 40 nights. When he was up there in the sky, the Midrash says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu took Moshe and he showed him a prophecy that no one has seen a prophecy like that. What prophecy was that? It was a prophecy that he showed him every generation to come. It was a prophecy that HaKadosh Baruch Hu showed Moshe every generation till the generation of Mashiach. Ari HaKadosh says that when Moshe Rabbeinu was up there and he saw every generation, when he got to the last generation, he got up and he said, I have to do something. When he got to the generation of Mashiach, he got up and he was on a mission to do something special. He was on a mission to bring on down something special. David HaMelech in the Tehillim, he writes there, Alita lamaron, shivita shevi, lekachta matanot ba'ada. David HaMelech explains what Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to do. Moshe Rabbeinu saw that at the generation of Mashiach, Bnei Israel would suffer a lot from when Bnei Israel had to exit from the exile. Moshe Rabbeinu saw that at the time that the generation when Mashiach will come, Bnei Israel will not have a leader to lead them out of the exile. Moshe Rabbeinu saw that when the last redemption, the redemption where HaKadosh Baruch Hu takes the world and brings it back like it was at the time of Adam HaRishon, because we know that this first Bet HaMikdash and second Bet HaMikdash, the world was not completely repaired yet. The world was still, there was still death, there was still the effects, the cause of the sin of Adam. But when Moshe Rabbeinu saw the generation where HaKadosh Baruch Hu was going to turn back the world and make the world back like it was at the first time, he saw that there was no leader. How will Bnei Israel survive that transformation? So Moshe Rabbeinu understood that he had to do something big. Ari HaKadosh says, and he explains the pasuk of David that we mentioned, Alita lamarom shevita shevi. That pasuk, what does it mean? David HaMelech said about Moshe Rabbeinu, when you went up to the sky, you took hostage, and you brought down hostage for the Adam. You brought down the hostage a gift for Bnei Israel. What hostage? What did Moshe Rabbeinu bring down that was a gift for Bnei Israel, but it was brought down like a hostage? Arei HaKadosh says that Moshe Rabbeinu was up, he saw a neshama that was a very special neshama. He saw a neshama that this neshama had the power to bring down an entire Torah that does not even belong to this world. Whose neshama was that? Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Arei HaKadosh says, Alita lamarom, shivita, shevi. You brought down what? A hostage. What is shevi? How do you spell shevi? Shin, bet, yud. Shin, bet, yud is the first letter of what name? Shimon Bar Yochai. That when Moshe Rabbeinu went up, Alita lamarom, shivita, shevi. You took who as a hostage? You took the neshama of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and he brought him down to the world. Moshe Rabbeinu knew that the only way that this neshama of Rabbi Shimon would come down and bring down the entire limud of Kabbalah is if he grabs it and he forces it down. And Moshe Rabbeinu already started the descent of the neshama of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Or Moshe Rabbeinu already started the beginning of bringing down the Torah Shebesod in order to benefit Bnei Israel. We see, Rabotai, also that Moshe Rabbeinu and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, Arei HaKadosh said that they also, at a certain point, like what we spoke about a couple of minutes ago, that they have the same piece of neshama. We see something amazing about them. If we look every year, this is just a small little candy to really understand how much they are attached. If we look at every single year, we see that every single year, if the Ilula of Moshe Rabbeinu falls on a Monday, for an example, with no exception, if it falls on a Monday, you're going to see the Ilula of Rabbi Shimon falls on a Monday. If it falls on a Tuesday, the Ilula every single year will fall on Tuesday. And what's amazing is it's not the only tzaddik. There's mamash a list of tzaddikim that their day always falls at the same day. One of them, surprising that Rabbi Chaim, my uncle, he put mamash a whole list of years, 50 years ahead. It's Rabbi Chaim Pinto. That every single year, Rabbi Chaim Pinto also Rabbi Meir Baal Hanes, the tzaddikim, that every single day that they fall, they will all fall on the same day. If they fall on Motzei Shabbat, and you see the years that one tzaddik falls on Motzei Shabbat, you see all the Ilulot fall on Motzei Shabbat. All those tzaddikim, they all have the connection of the link from that tzaddik to Moshe Rabbeinu. So that Rabotai is something, a small little candy to...
What do you mean? Like, so if Rabbi Chaim, for example, he realized on Tuesday, that he's linked to what are the tzaddik there?
So you have a list. You have Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, Moshe Rabbeinu, Rabbi Chaim Pinto, Rabbi Meir Baal Hanes. Rabbi Chaim, my uncle, Mamash did a whole... All on the same day. Every single year they're going to fall on the same day. Now this was an exception question. Questions will be after the shiur B'ezrat Hashem. No, we're going to continue now. So that Rabotai was the beginning of the descent of the neshama of Rabbi Shimon Yochai, the beginning of bringing down the Kabbalah, the Zohar Kadosh. Now Rabotai, the Zohar Kadosh. Moshe Rabbeinu, Arei HaKadosh says that Moshe Rabbeinu said that it was to help Bnei Israel in the future. Why? Why to help Bnei Israel at the generation of Mashiach? Rabotai, and that Rabotai is the big reason why now it's the time to do what we're starting. Rabotai, the limud of the Zohar was written how many years ago? At the time of the Gemara, 2,000 plus years ago. The entire limud of the Zohar could have been forgotten for 2,500 years. Because the Zohar was not written for any other generation. The Zohar Kadosh was brought down only for one time, for one generation. What generation is that? Mashiach. It was brought down just for the generation of Mashiach. It was brought down just for the generation of when the Geulah will come out. It was brought down only to help Bnei Israel exit the Geulah. Why? What is the concept of helping Bnei Israel exit the Geulah? Why do Bnei Israel need help to exit the Geulah? And that, Rabotai, is something that's very interesting that also David HaMelech brings. We know, Rabotai, that Bnei Israel For how many years they've been in exile? Thousands of years. Thousands of years Bnei Israel had no leader, had no direction to be pulled out of the galut, out of the exile. David HaMelech writes in the Tehillim, Ototanu en lanu, ve'en lanu od nevi. That we don't have a prophet that will help us, we don't have a prophet that will guide us out of the exile. And that, Rabotai, is exactly where we are now. The Gemara in Sotah, page Memtet, there says, Miyom shnichrav Bet HaMikdash, nil'emu kol hachachamim. From the day that Bet HaMikdash was destroyed, all the real chachamim, all those with real knowledge that can lead Bnei Israel to a new world, that can lead Bnei Israel to a transformation, no longer exist. So who's going to bring kindness, who's going to bring merit to Bnei Israel at the time of the transformation of both worlds? The Zohar HaKadosh. Ramchal, in his books, he writes this concept of Chavle Mashiach. And this, Rabotai, is the big reason of why the Zohar was written for this generation. The Zohar was brought down for us now, not for any other generation. The Zohar could have been forgotten for all those years, and only now we pick up the Zohar and we start to learn. We know, Rabotai, there's a concept of Chavlei Mashiach. What is Chavlei Mashiach? Chavlei Mashiach is that at the time when Bnei Israel will receive the redemption, where Mashiach will come, where Kadosh Baruch Hu will start the transformation, Ramchal teaches us the name of Chavlei Mashiach, the ropes of Mashiach. What does this mean, the ropes of Mashiach? Ramchal says that at the time of Mashiach, all Bnei Israel, in order to transfer themselves, in order to leave all that bad that they've collected throughout the entire exile, they will have to suffer, and this is what Chazal brings at the war of Gog and Magog, that at the time of Mashiach, there will be a lot of suffering that comes down to the world. Why, Rabotai? We have to try to understand what is this suffering that will come down to the world. And in order to understand what does this mean, that the Zohar Kadosh essentially was written in order to sweeten, in order for a person to leave this state of the world and enter the state of the Geulah, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu will completely change the world without suffering. Now, Rabotai, we're going to explain. We know, Rabotai, is something that is a little bit scary, but we're going to study it. And that is the concept of Chibut HaKever. What is Chibut HaKever? We know, Rabotai, that when a person lives his entire life, he lives his entire life, Baruch Hashem, of mitzvot, an entire life of good deeds, but also maybe some things on the side. We're not going to, not good things that were brought along. But for many years, a person's neshama was attached to what? To his body, to tumah, to material. After 120 years, when the neshama wants to go up to the world, can it go while it's still attached to its body? Can it go when it still has all those layers of all those years of him doing a couple of bad things here and there? It can't. The neshama can't go up with the concept of material. The neshama can't go up with any concept of sin or bad, because up there's only light. And there's no concept of bad. You can't bring up bad. So what does a person need to do before he goes up? He needs to separate between the good and the bad. So how do you separate between the good and the bad? So there's a book called Baal Achut Misapot. We spoke about this one time. This book is a very interesting book. I'm not going to get into what's inside this book, but just a little bit of a concept of what it is, what the concept of Chibut HaKever. So this book was written essentially by a big tzaddik that received all the knowledge of this book by asking ruchot, by asking things that are not from this world, by trapping them and forcing them to talk. After 120 years, the person passes away. Chazal teach us that it's time for the neshama to separate from the body. Now, in order to separate the neshama from the body, Chazal say that the moment that a person is buried, this is not how all our shurim will be. It's just the first shur for us to understand. When a person is buried, they have to separate the neshama, the spiritual, and the physical. So what do? The moment a person gets covered, 4 angels come. And these 4 angels come to the person and they bring down with them the neshama. And these 4 angels take the neshama of the person that passed away and they put it back in his body. That they essentially bring the person back to life. Now, because this person now is alive, the problem is that he's also too close to the top, to the air. So what do those 4 angels do? They drag him deep into the earth. When they drag him deep into the earth, the person, according to what Chazal explained to us, are mamash alive. These 4 angels take the person, and Chazal said these angels, they're cruel. They're very, very bad angels. They're not good angels. That when we say angels, we think of something good, of something pure. These angels are very cruel angels. And after, when the person is deep in the earth, each angel grabs a foot. One grabs a leg, one grabs a foot, one grabs a hand, each one grabs a limb. And they start to pull. And they pull, and they stretch, and they stretch. And they tear the neshama and the body apart. The Chazal say that this process is a very, very painful process. And there are ways to avoid it. There are ways to not suffer from chibut hakeva. And these angels, they pull and they stretch until the neshama gets separated. If you've ever been to an alvaya, we see that right after they cover the body, they cover the ground, everyone leaves the cemetery. Nobody stays. Always the Rabbanim say, go. No one should stay here. Why is that?
Angels coming.
To not hear the scream.
Wow.
Chazal say that sometimes the person screams so loud that you can hear his screams. And because you can hear his screams, you don't want to hear the screams of the person that is half alive, half not alive. So what do? Tell everyone to go. Now that, Abotai, is how HaKadosh Baruch Hu separates the person's neshama in his body. Now I'm not going to leave it like this. I'm going to finish this, then we're going to continue to our work. Now how can a person avoid this? Because it's something very important. Now we know, Abotai, that how do those angels know when to stop? We know that they know how to pull, but when do they stop? So to pull and to stretch, they know how to. But what's the stop sign for them to say, okay, it's done? So Chazal say that the angels only know when to stop whenever their body sees their neshama from outside. Now what does that mean? We know, Abotai, that even though that a person is brought back to life, his brain is still not there. So memory, he doesn't have. So even to remember his own name, he's not able to remember. But he feels. He doesn't have memory, but he feels. So he can't remember what the name of his own neshama is. So those angels, when they pull out the neshama, they wait until the neshama is completely disconnected. The moment the neshama is completely disconnected from the body, suddenly the neshama is no longer here, it's here. The moment it's here, what can the body identify?
The name.
It can identify the name. So the moment the body says his own name, he remembers the name of himself, in that moment, the angels, they understood, we leave. It's finished. There's no need to pull anymore. So how can a person remember his name? If by remembering the name, the faster you remember the name, the less a person needs to go through this bad. So there's gulot that a person, in the end of Amidah, the end of Tfilat Shema Yisrael, a person takes a pasuk. It could be from anywhere. It could be from the Tehillim, from the Torah, that starts with the first letter of his name and ends with the last letter of his name. So you find the pasuk. So for example, if you have Aaron, so you have to start a pasuk that starts with an aleph and end with a nun. And every single time before you finish Shema Yisrael, you mention that pasuk. And by mentioning that pasuk, it is gula to not forget your name after 120 years.
Those names are listed in the end of the Siddur.
Nachon, many Sidurim, in the end of the Siddur, you have psukim that you start that has the list of names. Now, another way that a person can separate himself from that problem, like tzaddikim. Tzaddikim don't go through that. Why? Because tzaddikim, their entire life, what are they doing? They're separating themselves. They're separating the neshama from their body. So it's a tzaddik, that a person that knows to not be, and this is like what we said, to not be a slave to his own desires, to not become captive of his own gashmiut. A person like that doesn't have to suffer the concept of chibut hakever. Now, Rabotai, a person that leaves this world, that leaves one world and goes to the next, has to go through a separation. So, at the time of the Geulah, there's no difference. At the time of when the Geulah, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu will change the world from its state now to the state where there's no death, there's no different. This entire world, for thousands of years, it's been collecting what? Materialism. It's been collecting what? It's been collecting klipot, those layers that we mentioned. For all these years, it's been collecting bad. HaKadosh Baruch Hu needs to pull out all the bad, bring back everyone back b'teshuvah, and the moment that he pulls out everything that is bad, he can connect both worlds. The moment that this world will be pure and everyone will do teshuvah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu can bring down the other world and put them together and bring back a world where there is no death, and bring back a world like what Chazal say, HaKadosh Baruch Hu ya'as machon latzadikim. What does that mean, machon latzadikim? That HaKadosh Baruch Hu will make a circle, that in this circle, tzaddikim will hold hands to one another, and amongst those tzaddikim, who will be holding the hands of the tzaddikim? HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And they will dance in a circle around the Torah. Meaning that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Melech Malchei HaMelachim, will be at a level that you can hold his hand, that you dance with him. But in order to get to that, all the bad needs to come out. All the bad that collected in the world needs to be separated. How is that separated? We all ask. With Chavlei Mashiach, with the hits of Mashiach. Chavlei is like ropes when Mashiach needs to come into. Now, Rabotai, something that is very interesting. A beautiful question. We know that we mentioned Ze Lumat Ze, and everything will tie it together, Bat Hashem. We say Ze Lumat Ze Bara Elohim. We say that when HaKadosh Baruch Hu brings down something good, the level of good that he brings down, what does he also bring down? Bad. Every tzaddik that HaKadosh Baruch Hu brings down to the world, and we mentioned this many times, every tzaddik that HaKadosh Baruch Hu brings down to the world, what does he bring down with him? Rasha. The exact level, Rasha. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu brought down Moshe, who did he bring down with Moshe? Bil'am. That we said Bil'am was even a bigger prophet than Moshe. We say Moshe had Moshe lo kam ke Moshe. That from Moshe until Moshe there was no one like Moshe. Yeah, in Am Yisrael. In Bnei Israel there was no one bigger than Moshe. But in the other nations there was one bigger than Moshe. Who is that? Bil'am. That Bil'am, that even though he was a Rasha, he still spoke to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He was at that level of a prophecy.
Rabbi Shimon?
Bil'am.
Rabbi Shimon?
No.
Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who was his opposite?
I don't know. But in every generation, whenever HaKadosh Baruch Hu brought down big bracha, he brought down big bad. We see even with the map. With the map, this is the best example. HaKadosh Baruch Hu brought the most holy land, Eretz Israel. Right near it, what did he put? Egypt. That Egypt had the most pure impurity that existed in the world. Everything that HaKadosh Baruch Hu brings down, big tzaddik, he brings down with it a big rasha. So when HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to bring down Eliyahu Navi, the one that's going to change everything, who is he going to bring down with him? If HaKadosh Baruch Hu keeps everything in a balance, who is he going to bring down when he brings down Eliyahu Navi? So the Gemara in Sanhedrin says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will send down angels and send down kings to the world, which their hits will be stronger and more painful than the hits of Aman HaRasha. That at the time of the Geulah, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu brings down Eliyahu Navi, with Eliyahu, he's going to bring down a lot of bad people, because Eliyahu is big, in order to keep that balance, but also in order to do something else. In order to bring what we mentioned, Chavlei Mashiach. Now, what is the concept, Abotai, of Chavlei Mashiach? That why is it that by the separation is a painful process? Why couldn't it be done in a process of easy? Why also the same question could be asked about Chibut HaKever? Why is it done with such a painful process? Why can't it be done easy?
Because your Yetzer Hara doesn't want it to happen?
There you go, you answered. When a person does a sin, what happens to him? What happens to him, Abutai? The Yetzer Hara stands on top of him and he holds him. When a person is walking after, when a person is Yetzer Hara controls him, like we see that some people, it's not Chas v'Shalom, they don't want to. The Yetzer Hara keeps on holding on to them. The Yetzer Hara, on every single step that they do, the Yetzer Hara is always with them. That is a person that the Yetzer Hara has grabbed onto him and has put his roots inside that person. And the Yetzer Hara, what does he do? The Yetzer Hara does not want to leave. The Yetzer Hara wants to get bigger. He doesn't want to get smaller. He has the desire to get bigger. So what does the Yetzer Hara do? He starts to climb from one midah, from one trait that the person has to another. So he starts maybe with kas, with anger. That he attacks a person's anger. And with that trait, he goes deep. Then he'll go to his emunah, to his faith. And he climbs from level to level. When he gets to the level of the 7th level, which is ir'ah, the fear, here the Yetzer Hara can't help himself. Here the Yetzer Hara says, if I'm able to grab the person here at the step of fear, if I'm able to hold on to a person with his fears, I will control his own fears, I will control this person completely. So the Yetzer Hara, what does he do? He doesn't control himself. And he runs to grab on to the fear of the person. But that, Rabotai, is the kindness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that he put in the nature of the person, that the Yetzer Hara wants the fear. You know, Rabotai, that the fear belongs to who? Who is the true fear that exists in the world? HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Melech Malchei HaMelachim. The only person that owns the concept of fear, the only person that we should have irat shamayim, fear of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's not just a regular fear like a king of this world that we fear that is going to punish us. It's a fear of Melech Malchei HaMelachim. The only one that owns fear is who? HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That no one else can control the fear. That the fear belongs to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. When the Satan gets to that level of fear, what does he do? He says, I'm going to grab it. But the moment he grabs it, what happens to him? He becomes, it harms him, it burns him. And the moment that it burns him, it completely lifts himself. All those roots that he put inside a person, all those ropes that he tied around the person, he lifts them up for a second. The moment he lifts them up, what happens to that neshama, that person? He has a chance to do what? To escape. To run away. That only with the fear, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is able to make the Yetzer Hara, to make the Satan lift all his chains that he chained the person and let the moment where the person can escape. And that is the essence of Chavlei Mashiach. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu brings down big fear to the world. The moment that this big fear comes down to the world, what happens to everyone? True fear comes down. A person sees HaKadosh Baruch Hu and does a true teshuvah. That the only thing that can release the Yetzer Hara is what? It's the fear. And that is why HaKadosh Baruch Hu at the time of the Geulah will have to bring down angels and have to bring down kings which are cruel in order to bring down fear to the world. Now, Botai, now that we did this entire learning, how does Zohar help me? How, by reading the Zohar, how is it going to help me not be affected by Chavlei Mashiach? Aramchal says that a person that studies Zohar, a person that sticks to the Zohar, the generation before the Geulah, he will not suffer at all at the time when Geulah comes. That the person that holds on to the Zohar tight to him, close to him, at the time of Geulah, he will not suffer at all. He won't feel a thing. Why is that, Rabotai? This, Rabotai, is a big limud. And this is why today, now it's a generation to pick up the Zohar and to study the Zohar. When Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai wrote the Zohar, what did he do in order to write the Zohar? What did he do, Rabotai?
He fled.
He fled. He escaped. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai escaped what? He escaped everything. He escaped the city. He escaped all the pleasures in the world. And by escaping, he hid where? In the Me'ara. He hid in a place where he is alone. And by escaping from everything, by escaping this entire world, he brought down what? The Zohar. That the Zohar in its core is the result of what? Of escape. Of a person that flees. If a person reaches that concept of escaping the Yetzer Hara, there's no need for what? For Chavle Mashiach. If a person can escape the Yetzer Hara without having the fear, without having those bad angels coming down to the world, he already escaped. Botai, Ramchal explains, if a person holds on to the Zohar close to him, he already escaped from the Yetzer Hara. By holding on to the Zohar, you are holding on to that Yesod, you are holding on to that pillar that Rabbi Shimon did, that he escaped in order to bring down the Zohar. That by learning the Zohar, you escape from Chavlei Mashiach already now. And that, Abota, is the koach of the Limud HaZohar. When a person learns Zohar, he already runs away from the Sitacha, he already runs away from this world. He runs away from the need of transferring this world from the way it is now to the way it will be at the time of the Geulah. Like we mentioned, the tzaddikim, they don't go through what? Through? No, not through
The separation.
They don't go through the separation. Why? Because they have no need for it. So if you hold on to the Zohar and you already escaped from the Yetzer Hara now, you have no need to suffer a bit. And that is why the Zohar Botai is our Torah of this generation. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai wrote something that at the time it didn't make sense. Rabbi Shimon said at the time of the Geulah, the Zohar will be available in everyone's hands. That the Zohar will be, anyone that wants to touch the Zohar, it will be there. 3,000 years ago they said, how is that possible? Today to buy a Siddur, you have to sell your house. At the time it was, you have to have a writer to write it down. How will the entire world be able to hold the Zohar in their hands? I'll put it today in our generation. We find the Zohar where? Everywhere. In the blink of a second, a person can have the entire Zohar where in his hand. In the blink of a second, a person can take his device and write Zohar, and the Zohar is everywhere. But in this generation, we have to focus on the Zohar. In this generation, it is when the Zohar was written for us. The Zohar was written for us to pick up the Zohar, to hold on to the Zohar, and like we said, to taste from what? From Etz HaChaim. To taste from the world to come. If we hold on to the Zohar now, very close, when the Geulah will come, B'ezrat Hashem, because this is a generation of the Geulah. We will all, B'ezrat Hashem, meet in Yerushalayim, but with not a bit of any suffering of Chavlei Mashiach. So that, Rabotai, is the reason we're going to do the Zohar. So that is why we're doing the Shiur. But parallel to the Shiur, we're doing the reading. But every month we'll do the Siyum of the Zohar. We'll be finishing the Zohar on Rosh Chodesh, as well as doing the Shiur. We mentioned how we're going to do the Shiur. I'm going to repeat it in short for Rabbi Yigal. That B'ezrat Hashem, what we're going to be doing, we're going to start from when a person wakes up till a person goes to sleep, and the Chagim and the Shabbatot. Every detail of what really happens behind. Because the Zohar, the Kabbalah is what? It's the sod, it's a secret. It's what's behind the scene that we don't see. B'ezrat Hashem, that is what the Shiur will be. Next week, Abotai, it's going to be how to study Zohar. And next week, it's going to be the first Shiur. It's going to be the first B'ezrat Hashem Shiur that we're going to give. And it's going to be how to study Zohar. That is very, very important. Because if we're going into the Zohar, we want to have a clear head how to study. We want to know all the rules. We want to know what we're allowed to touch, what we're not allowed to touch, how we learn it, how we think of it, how we apply it, and all of the things all the tools we need in order to B'ezrat Hashem to play with this Kedusha, to lishtasheh with our beautiful Torah. So with that merit, B'ezrat Hashem Abotai, for the effort that we're doing now, that we're fulfilling the will of Rabbi Shimon. That Rabbi Shimon said that at the time of the Geulah, it was his will that everyone gets up and spreads the Zohar Kadosh. With the will of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, we will all B'ezrat Hashem that we are starting something new. Now it could be something small, but what we're starting something new that I don't think exists, which is not only a shi'ur of Zohar, but we are bringing down really that learning and making this learning for everyone. If a person wants to go now and to study Zohar, it's almost impossible. At least here, I don't know in Eretz Israel, but here it's impossible. What we're doing is we're bringing the branch of the Eitz HaChaim. It's like we take the tree of life that we mentioned, and we're branching it out here, Bet Hashem, to our city. And maybe with that merit, Bet Hashem, we'll all see big atzlacha in our life, big shefa, and B'ezrat Hashem, anything bad that Chas v'Shem exists in the world will have no effect on us because we are protected with the Bisad Dishmaya and with the Kedusha of the Zohar Kadosh.
Two things. I think next week if you all